Well now, a huge welcome to you to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my fourth book in the series, and this is called The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. Now I want to emphasise that this is a novel, and only a novel. Yes, it is based on real people, even some celebrities, and real events. But I need to apologise to you if you feel you've identified yourself, because that was never my intention. The intention is for this simply to be a novel, an entertainment for the end. Whilst walking down the mountain to the Dasa, the Duke and brother passed me on the back of a motorcycle, and he called out hello to me so nicely. I reflected on this and realised that he's only capable of seeing the world from his point of view and lacks my empathy. Yes, he was prepared to see Maddie and I physically and mentally ill as a result of his black magic, even dead, but only because he did not see it as wrong. Genuinely, he doesn't. Maybe he knows that there are many universes, and that killing someone in one universe does not represent anything final. What he lacks is the moral conviction that it is wrong to impose one's will on another. I also reflected on recent events, which has left me somewhat upset. At the bottom of the mountain near the Passar lives a retired school teacher who paints wayang kulit in his spare time. I always take an interest and chat with him. One week I took a video of him painting, and he asked if I wanted to buy a wayang. I said no. But then I got home, I reflected that he sells wayang to dealers, and they ultimately are sold to tourists on Jogja. Maybe as a result of the health restrictions, he was getting no sales and was anxious for money. So the next pawn I offered to buy one, but he wanted between 200 and 500% over what it was worth. Maybe I should have negotiated, but I feel very hurt. A few ponds later, as I passed, his wife explained to me that a rich person from Semarang was buying many wayang off him, the implication being that I was not rich enough to do so, which is true. I'm so hurt by this whole episode. But to Indonesians, and maybe most of the world, this is life. There's nothing sinister in the interaction. Why should people think like me, including my brother-in-law? And I have no right to judge them when they don't. It's true that as an empath I'm too sensitive, but the truth is that I'm far too sensitive to criticism and far too emotional over things that really don't matter. I've never been able to take constructive role in an appraisal, and I've always blamed my father and the paintbrush. But maybe I should realise that these are signs of an empath who is yet to fully heal. Perhaps more disturbingly still are two examples of manufactured shortages being exploited to make money from the public. Every Lebanon, Eid al-Fitr, we give all young children calling at a home a small amount of money in an envelope. We need to get these small notes from the bank prior to the holiday, but this year the notes ran out very quickly in our village, and were only available on the black market. Clearly the health restrictions had restricted people's ability to earn money honestly. So dishonest means now dominate, almost certainly in collusion with bank employees, as the money had to be ordered in advance. At the same time, it was also announced that staff administering the mandatory flu tests at airports had been reusing the swabs. I doubt if there's enough flu vaccine in Indonesia for sharp practice to have developed in relation to fake vaccines, but we have this to look forward to. I should add that as Lebanon approached, the electricity cuts became more frequent and the internet and phone coverage significantly worse, something that happens each year, and like everyone I excuse it by thinking that fasting employees are maybe less efficient. But in the past, such deteriorating service continues after Lebanon, suggesting a deliberate policy by companies, not least as Ramadan is the traditional time when prices are increased. Indeed, maybe as a result of Lebanon, but the restrictions became increasingly bizarre and unpredictable, such as restriction entry to the beach without a test less than 24 hours. Difficult for many people and impossible for people from my village where there are no testing facilities. In a society like Indonesia, such uncertainty creates many opportunities for lowly officials to supplement their income. And maybe that was the motivation. But this favours the rich, for whom such considerations are a smaller proportion of their income, meaning that they can continue with their economic activity, while the poor simply give up. A microcosm of how wealth is being redistributed from the poor to the rich all around the world. The uncertainty is partially a result of frequent policy changes, a lack of reliable information and fake news. I later found that restrictions are largely devolved to local government, hence the variability and uncertainty. We are all now aware of at least a minor way in which we are being lied to by the media. Some of us would take this far further. Not knowing who or what we can rely on, most of us stopped doing what we were doing and stopped making plans. But yet again, the rich continue as normal, making even more money out of the manufactured uncertainty. We have a fellow Brit, Matthew Freud, great-grandson of Sigmund, to thank for the destruction of news. But I doubt if ever he foresaw that it was going to prevent local people from visiting a beach in Java. I recalled how as a young child my father would grab tools from me when I was trying to help him and shout at me, letting know that what a bad job I was doing. The result was my dislike for gardening, as I could never garden without my father criticising me. Is this the real pain that I need to unlock, the inner child? That it's not my mother who's affected me so much, but my father, whom I love so much. That my father has left me with deep-rooted confidence issues, just as my ex-partner claimed I had with Branwell. Is this the dark secret, that the Branwell loves me as I do my father, but I've left him with severe problems, unable to function in the world? Of course, his psychopathic mother has left Branwell with major issues, but he lacks confidence and self-love to address these issues, thanks to my unconscious and unwitting behaviour. Branwell needed me when he was confused by his mother's behaviour, but I wasn't there for him, so his solution was that a child would devise, which is so dysfunctional in adult life. Given I seem to be surrounded by so many people with depression and mental health issues, is this my real mission? All see in me a solution to their pain, but then a few, like my ex-partner, seek to give me the pain that they feel. Is it too late for me to study psychiatry? It is too late for me to study psychiatry, but I wonder if I can use the light to help these poor souls. Branwell looks towards other adults, especially me, to resolve his problems instantly, as if by magic. Then when this does not happen, his reaction is the rage of a child, which is exactly where this reaction is coming from. Branwell wants to achieve so much without putting in the effort required, and becomes angry when he does not reach his goal. The self-destruction becomes a constant cycle, which seems so incongruous with an intelligent, articulate young man that Branwell is on the surface. Now I have to conclude that Branwell's only solution to the massive disappointment he feels is in drugs, and given that he's largely ignored by his mental health team, I suspect that these are bought on the street. But he really needs to find his inner child to forgive him, whilst I need to recognise that he has legitimate pain while nudging him towards more appropriate behaviour. So I must become the father I failed so miserably at during my first chance. Unless, of course, he isn't my child, and it is I who need to forgive and love myself some more. I've mentioned that I've been watching a YouTube channel about a baby monkey in Vietnam. Now the monkey seems so loving and clever, and in all probability he is, but the owner's monkey appears to be loving towards the monkey, spending his time teaching the monkey tricks or skills, depending on his perspective, however long this takes. I return to thinking about the monkey. He is showered with loving attention and appears to be developing as a well-adjusted human child. Indeed, he is so loving and affectionate that viewers from around the world shower him with gifts. But what will become of the monkey who has the mind of a human child? Most tube owners would release him into the wild as soon as he gets unmanageable, which will happen when he reaches adolescence, and inevitably this means that the adolescent will be ripped apart by the wild monkeys. I believe the owner to be a good man and will build a large cage for the monkey once it reaches adolescence. But is this really humane? Is it fair on the monkey? The parallels with Branwell are so strong. His mother brought him up to be the Wunderkind, and once he became adolescent and somewhat violent, she rejected him, even taking out a restraining order on him. But the large cage of the mental institutions has now closed. Indeed, from what I can understand from Branwell, who is hardly an impartial witness, his psychiatrist's response to him was the worst possible. Far from comforting his inner child, she was taken in by his mother's display of victimhood and joined in condemning him. If only I could have been the parent when he needed me, maybe he would not be left unable to function in the world and a prey for the other monkeys. But even as an adult, I have left him to the manipulation of his adult and an overworked and equally manipulative mental health team. Because what is, we are told, is for the best. Or did his mental health team know that he and his mother were scamming me, but there were legal protocols which prevented them from warning me? Following this discovery, I seem to be encouraged to explore the dark side, as without a knowledge of the dark, it was difficult for me to help those afflicted. At first I was reassured that I could simply shine my light and the darkness would go. Indeed, I found that the darkness was more frightened of my light than I was their dark. Slowly I was encouraged to explore the darkness further without my light, whilst feeling safe in the knowledge that I had the light. Slowly I was encouraged to believe that there is good and bad in us all, but I now believe this is related to my father's comments about people acting. So I now see many universes in which some have taken the wrong decisions, or most likely to have not fought enough against the wrong decision. Within these universes, they are all avatars. But these very same people have a kind of loving side in other universes. Indeed, even as avatars, their role is to reveal some truth to the non-avatars, so that they will learn from their experience. I now find myself very close to the position I held before I embarked on this journey. Almost moral relativism. But I must remember my daily jihad to embrace the love and bliss, and to drive out the greed and pride. Is this where the dualist and the non-dualist views of the world interact? In the individual, or should I say consciousness? Because without ego, there is no individual. So what was really in the inner sanctum of Solomon's temple? Is it that I too have contributed to the psychological damage of others, even when at times I believe I was doing the right thing? That's not to say that the world isn't run by greedy psychopaths and being drawn into directions which are dangerous for humanity, that Omuni and many others have not tried to harm me using black magic, nor that my ex-partner is not a psychopath, and that Branwell is not really my son, nor that my mother is not on the narcissism scale. I've learnt to forgive all these people, that I have released that those I love may have harmed me to the most, does not mean that I should now focus on their role in my problems. No, the last lesson is to forgive myself and release myself to become the adult, the husband, the father that I need to be. In the inner sanctum, I find myself in a darkened schoolroom with young children. Then the television came on and we were transfixed, just as I now see Yanni's son to the mobile phone. So is this how I was encouraged to leave the spiritual world and accept the constraints of the materialist world? In my case, I leapt into the materialist world, watching television in the flat above my father's grocery store and my mother's hairdressing salon. At first it was with Andy Pandy and Bill and Pen, soon to be replaced by war and cowboy movies, but above all, Daleks. I have to say, I do not remember watching television at my primary school, apart from during the moon landing, not least as there was nothing broadcast during the daytime, so we would huddle around the radio to listen to the Home Service's educational programmes. Returning to my single universe theory and black magic and committing my thoughts to writing, I'm engaging in black magic. Every one of my books is an act of black magic. The same must be true of my tarot readings. So does that mean that the Messianics are correct in condemning my interest in the paranormal and sharing my divinations? Yes, they are, but in forcibly imposing their universe on others, they are certainly no better than I. Now, it's not for me to judge the magnitude of my indiscretion, as that is Allah's prerogative. But it seems to me that the purer thing for me to do is to change my thoughts and beliefs about others, not reinforce them in my writing. So I create my universe and can change it for the better simply by changing my thoughts towards the actions of others. This is why I'm being encouraged to explore my dark side, because we all have the light and dark, and once again, this is my jihad. In other words, I must not externalise evil, but understand that it's my own dark thoughts which create the evil in my universe. This explains my father's comments that they're acting, as others are only playing my thoughts. So this new explanation that they are avatars simply fulfil the roles that I've allocated to them. Where does this leave the psychopath and the narcissist? Well, they are the darkest, innermost thoughts. Love bombing is us learning to love ourselves, which then leads to self-loathing. But they are thoughts, not those of another. The psychopath and the narcissist are simply conduits for our subconsciousness. So could my father have been referring to Branwell not really being my son? So to everything I have maligned in my writing, I must offer my profuse apologies. It was I who created your actions. This exploration was very dark indeed. When opening the doors of Solomon's temple in my meditation, I found the temple to be filled with blood which engulfed me. When entering the inner sanctum, I was plunged into the depths of hell. I wanted to resist using the light, but I was exploring. But ultimately, this was my own escape. Outside of my meditation, I felt something trying to get in through the soles of my feet once more. Nothing disturbing, except these were sensations I had spent so long getting rid of. During this exploration of my dark side, a new revelation came to me that was so incredibly shocking, although had I thought it through, I'd have been able to predict it. A young female tarot reader from the US on YouTube posted an incredibly dark reading. She believed it to be disjointed, but it described the psychopathic abuse I'd endured for some 20 years. But then when she went on to describe my supernova and my Playboy reaction, that she described this as me destroying a family, I knew it was coming from Branwell's troubled mind. Does this mean that my former partner or Branwell were actually using magic? Not necessarily. It has made me realise that these energies are forces which exist within our world. Maybe they were originally created by magic, or maybe this is just a part of what is unknown to science. The energy that I felt I had already defeated had simply moved on and was attempting to find new hosts, as a virus does, via this tarot reading. This would mean that the Hindus are right, in contrast to the Messianic Muslims. That is, the demons, jinn, whatever you want to call them, that cannot be destroyed, but simply moved from one host. So does this mean that my tarot is dangerous, as the Messianics claim? Well, yes, it does. But as I maintain, so is anything which can influence others. So if this was not magic coming from my ex-partner or Branwell, how could I detect Branwell's interpretation of events in a tarot card reading from thousands of kilometres away from him and even further from me? Well, it is this telepathy again, which I'm now understanding is one of the main, if not the main phenomena we attribute to magic. You see, Branwell believes that I destroyed a family, and this thinking affected me. I even wrote it in previous episodes. I had cut off Branwell's thoughts from affecting me, and it had escaped into the universe and came back to me via a tarot reading. I should add, not for the first time, but this time was profound. This would also mean that the effects is what are called the evil eye has a much more profound effect than much magic. Indeed, it is the intent that matters, and even the most elaborate magical ceremony only channels feelings. And if these are the jealousy and hatred of the evil eye, then it is the most destructive. Maybe only a metaphor, but that very day Maddie discovered snake eggs in the undergrowth of our lemon tree, less than a metre from our home. As she broke them open, to our surprise there was not a single unborn snake, but many tiny snakes wriggling around. 3, my ex-partner, Branwell, and I. Ready to give birth to a dark trajectory which would affect many. Indeed, from the law of the 100th monkeys means that these thoughts can spread across the universe, infecting others like a virus. What does this tell us about the current health crisis and the proliferation of greed and indeed evil within society? I later thought that Maddie had maybe overreacted to the snake eggs. We have no idea if these were venomous snake eggs, and even if they were, if they'd stay around our home. So like everything else in the world, the reaction was driven by fear. Nevertheless, the next day spotted what I believed to be a green tree snake in my beloved passion fruit vines, eating a frog. I myself was fearful, but later heard that the snake had been seen moving away from our house. I should also add that that very day Maddie felt an earthquake. Although I didn't, but I never do. Now, I have described this as though an external force which we are unable to control, because that is the only language which adequately captures what I experienced. However, if we co-create our own reality, then this is not really external. So it's something which escaped from my consciousness. In all probability, yes. It was something I had trapped within my subconscious, but my exploration of the dark side had released it once again. Also, as time and space are human constructs, this does not have to reflect Branwell or even my ex-partner's current thinking. Simply energy released by the universe, which has resonance with the energies I once detected. But if I really wanted to read something into these things, then all these things became really profound. The frog Armageddon continued, and the snake became what I believe to be a yellow-bellied sea snake, very venomous, but nothing like as aggressive as a green tree snake. Eventually, having gouged on frogs, it disappeared into our pool to hibernate for the dry season. Now, this pool contains our turtle, which I've named after my departed father. Once again, thank you, Dad. Ramadan came and I stopped using my tarot or listening to the readings of others. I also stopped meditating and maybe in compensation began to dream much more. Unlike Maddie's dreams, I've always felt mine to be weird and impossible to explain. But I now realise that so many of them are me attempting to categorise seemingly unrelated objects and events, which is exactly what I've done all my life. At one time, it even produced a living for me. So my dreams really are me attempting to categorise life events and even attribute meaning to them. Some days I felt exhausted, maybe as a result of fasting, or these dreams, and spent the entire day in a sedated state, unable to revive myself with coffee. But I began to accept that was, and to stop dwelling on the past and the paranormal, focusing on the now. Indeed, whilst I do accept that there are many things that are yet to be explained by science, or more importantly, cannot be explained by science, I'm beginning to realise that if we create our own reality, then everything can ultimately be explained by psychology. Maybe no more convincingly than a belief in the paranormal, but more acceptable to the rest of humanity. Another explanation for the major changes that I feel is that this is me as an empath taking my power back, not praying for others, that I am free to love myself and ultimately become stronger for others. As always, having reached these conclusions, I was somewhat tested. My constipation was such that some days I was unable to go to the toilet, and the pain in my neck returned. And now I'm not discounting that these could indicate that my empathetic personality is picking up on the feelings of others, maybe even some wishing me harm and using black magic. But the dehydration from fasting is also likely to be to blame, and I have known for a long time, but now at last can focus on the latter and therefore avoid the cycle of paranoia and despair that is all too familiar. I finally found how to heal people as a light worker. It's probably apparent to you that I've formed a strong psychic relationship with Maspera and his family, born out of my compassion for all their turmoils. But I have to admit that I understood this feeling towards his daughter as something less charitable, despite me being completely devoted to Made and being faithful towards her. I now realise that this compassion and love is something I felt many times throughout my life, but I've always mistaken it for sexual desire, often consummating this desire. Maspera's daughter came to visit us one day, explaining that she had a fever and shivers, a headache and difficulty in keeping her food down after fasting. She asked me for herbs, but I explained that this was the body's immune response and to come back if other symptoms appeared. I immediately felt her symptoms. I did nothing to achieve this, but I already felt a strong bond. I became concerned that this was the flu of the current health crisis, despite not really being worried about it. Nevertheless, that evening, I felt the virus-like symptoms that were all too familiar with me, but woke the next morning feeling fine. Again, nothing that unusual, but what was unusual was that Maspera's daughter's symptoms also left her at the same time. So light working and healing really is a part of being an empath. All empaths are able to feel hurt, pain and disease in others. What changed is that I now love myself enough to destroy anything malevolent. All I need to do is take on the pain of others and then with my light to fight it off. I use the word disease, but I'm yet to test this, and maybe it only relates to viruses, because I have already hypothesised a strong connection between what people call jinn and viruses, although somehow I think it's possible with all illness, although I may have particular skills with viruses. Indeed, isn't black magic and the paranormal an expression of fear? Now, I'm not just discounting just how profound these experiences can be, certainly not having written 4 books of my own on my own experience. But if we step into the light and live without fear, these experiences disappear. This is the reason why those who don't believe in the paranormal don't experience it, because they have no fear of it. We really do co-create our reality and do so through our beliefs. So what we believe cannot harm us, really cannot harm us. Taking this further, if we can dispense with all the fear, then all our lives will be without negative impacts of our worry. So don't give in to the fear porn and live your life as God intended. Then I found myself once more being drawn towards the inside of Plato's cave. I'll never forget my journey outside, but just maybe I'm better off in the company of the ignorant than flirting with the insane on the outside. Maybe this is the ending of the dark night of the soul, and I can begin to live once more. There is a hegemony to convince us that we should abandon life as God intended, is behind so many of the world's current problems. Man has a tendency to complicate everything, no more so than creating a camera obscura of how we should be engaging with each other. I include in this the practice of magic, and especially ceremonial magic. For too long I believed that I was being subjected to internal forces were determining my fate. But I now understand that this is my own consciousness, my own beliefs and thoughts, which were ultimately responsible for what I believed was my fate. Now I know that my consciousness is connected to yours and everyone's, but more than this, it is connected to animals, plants, what we call inanimate objects, and even consciousness that we don't as of yet understand. So yes, others can influence my thinking. And that is what pushed Maddie and I off the track. This works like what we call telepathy. In fact, it is telepathy. And this is related to what scientists call quantum entanglement. So what is known as the evil eye is at the heart of what people see as black magic, including how it influenced Maddie and I. The way to overcome this is not to give in to these negative feelings, but remain convinced in our light and to shine our light into the world. It's not done so much by sending love to those who wish to harm you, but using love in our every interaction and seeing everything as illuminated by the light. Indeed, if we were not empaths, I would agree with Thomas Sheridan that sending love to our adversaries is a very dangerous prescription of the new age. Thomas is a pagan who's had a great influence on me, despite me often finding myself disagreeing with him, especially in relation to Islam. Even for us, sending love only added to the disconnect between our adversaries and ourselves, and is the reason why everything took so long. But it is a necessary part of our finding the light. This means that our problems were not simply coming from Jakarta and Indonesia, but the love of my mother who wanted me beside her, and the hatred of a psychopathic ex-partner and schizophrenic son. Only recently have I fully understood this, and only recently have I realised that these are stronger than the ritual magic that our neighbours were using, if for no other reason that my telepathic bonds with them were so much stronger. Indeed, it is probably this power coming from the UK that influences what I call other avatars much more than the events of those seeking to harm us in Indonesia. This is related to my gradual acceptance that what I find wanting in Jakarta is common the world all over, or is it simply the conspicuous consumption in Jakarta means it all the more obvious, at least to those of us who've been here for a while. This would explain why Maddie and I felt our strongest attack at the Egret Hotel in Manchester, as we were strongest to the source. At the time, Maddie said she was surprised that magic had crossed from the ocean from Indonesia, but now I confronted her. She knew all along the main problems were being sent from my ex-partner. Whilst I'm sure that the malevolence was coming from my ex-partner, it was magnified by Maddie's guilt at having broken up a family, and karma did the rest. This was the reason why Maddie had called Steve and the German to rescue her from Manchester, believing that my ex-partner's will was enough to get me back and leave her stranded at the Egret Hotel. If for no other reason, Maddie is correct, because my ex-partner had indeed conspired to keep me away the entire day, leaving Maddie in the hotel. We were also told that knowing who was behind our problems and why would help us to overcome the black magic, which is true, but not in the obvious way, as it's not about retribution, even though this is the immediate reaction of most people. That every Dukan and Ustad we visited focused on who our perpetrator was, and their motives only fueled our paranoia, leading to our ultimate tragedy. No, this knowledge is only useful once you've recovered and found your natural defence in the light. It's not so much about putting your guard up, but that the malevolence now simply bounces off you. We are now such different people, and our light is apparent to all we meet. This only increases the numbers and determination of those with free will who want to harm us. But it is also our natural defence, because those I describe as avatars will pick up on our love and light and reflect it back to us. So when I say that Maddie was simply Maddie being Maddie, can make this world a better place, and this is how it works. This also means that I'm no longer fearful of Jakarta and our neighbours, because we have learnt to deal with this subterfuge. I'm sure that there's some amongst you who have written off what I'm saying as New Age mumbo-jumbo, and let me reassure you that I have included myself within those sceptics. In my defence, these ideas are not coming directly from the New Age, but feelings I have during meditation, confirmed in my conversations with Pakano, who follows a Kajawan belief system. I've seen commentators suggesting that Kajawan was influenced by the philosophy of the Dutch colonists, and maybe there's some truth in this, but in the main, Kajawan reflects the traditional beliefs of the people of Java. That in part resembles theosophy should come as no surprise, as it too draws on Hindu and Buddhist concepts. Now, I would not wish our experiences on anyone, but they led us to finding the light, our true selves and our mission in this universe. Indeed, all that we experienced on our subsequent flight to the mountains is a microcosm of what many are experiencing as a result of the health crisis. For those of you who identify with this, I hope that it also results in you finding your light. We returned to Jakarta, and unknown to us, the lockdown in Jakarta had been relaxed somewhat. So we took ourselves to Chase Frank for Christmas and the New Year drinks we missed. I had a great time, apart from my first drink in nearly a year. I met Jan once more, and I was able to have my first real conversation in a long time. To my amazement, Jan holds similar opinions to me about almost everything. Indeed, he was even more scathing about Jakarta than I had been, even at my worst. But what really lifted us was we could see the change in us, and while sceptical about the mystical reasons, he could see the joy and hope within us. I had a sleepless night, just like those I used to experience when I was living in Jakarta. But my most recent inability to sleep was when my father had died, so I assumed that my mother had died, but there was no news from the UK. Now, her heart is weak, and she is in hospital. Her time cannot be long. Maybe she had passed and was given a CPU. Maybe I'll find out. The next day, we heard that Bertrand, Maddie's elderly French former sugar daddy's wife, had passed from a heart attack. We also heard that someone from a mountain in Java had committed suicide. A few weeks later, I realised that my mother's variable blood pressure was an extension of her attention-seeking. She had discovered ways of controlling her heart to fool the medical profession, those around her, Parkano, and especially me, that she's unwell. Her control is not so strong, and sometimes that really does cause herself medical problems, like a mini-stroke. But above all, she's seeking attention. So what I felt was her controlling her blood pressure, and by telepathy sending it to me. Indeed, when I was in the UK, I was treated for variable blood pressure, but since moving to Indonesia, have dispensed with all of my Western medicines. Despite believing Maddie to be much better adjusted than me, when I finally openly discussed what happened with my mother, with Maddie, she confessed that her reaction was to run. And that was why she took herself to our small bedroom for the rest of our stay in Shrewsbury. Not only could she feel the manipulation, but she could feel how it was affecting her blood pressure. So proof that my mother is a narcissist, and that so much of my life I've been running from her. The desire to put distance between us has dominated my life and led me into the hands of my psychopathic ex-partner. But how can I establish boundaries when she ignores them, and the greatest impact is via telepathy? For some time now, my tarot readings have suggested that my dark night of the soul is not yet finished, despite any revelations being fairly minor now. The tarot also suggested that I was being stalked and that someone was reading my communications. But I began to reflect on the influence of my ex-partner and our past, and in particular the depression which took over me. Although I understand that this could simply be a reflection of her hatred to me and sending bad luck to me, I must also consider that black magic has been used. Whilst in the 20 years that I lived with her, I was never aware of any magic, black magic. I have to say that this would come as no surprise. As I pondered the situation, I remembered a former employee, whom I had considered to be a friend. He purported to be a Wiccan follower. Now, it's not improbable that he has employed black magic to assist my ex-partner. In fact, the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Not least as he was originally from Liverpool, and a long time ago I felt a Liverpool connection, which I believed was coming from my Uncle Norman. The former employee had also been my main hope of subcontract work, coming from the UK, of which I've been offered none. I then remembered that he'd set up my email account. What if he'd given my ex-partner access to my emails? The more I thought about it, the less ridiculous it seemed. It would certainly explain my misunderstandings with Branwell and his mental health team. Furthermore, as I have reached out to a number of old friends, their emails suddenly stopped without any apparent reason. I realise that this seems like yet another far-fetched example of my paranoia, but only if you're unaware of her personality. It was in the UK that Maddie and I felt the effects of black magic somewhat the strongest. After I'd spent all day in this man's house, waiting for my ex-partner to pick up Branwell. It was also in the UK where I soiled myself, and on reflection, the source of my worst problems. These insights made perfect sense to Maddie, who'd always believed that the black magic was being used, that it did not feel like Indonesian magic, and that my ex-partner was the source. Reflecting further, what if my ex-partner had been caught up in forces she didn't understand? I'm sure that she is a psychopath, but could this have made her susceptible to black magic? Could this really explain my father's comments about playing a role? That psychopaths, narcissists and those who dabble in black magic are most susceptible to the magic of others. My former employee from Liverpool is an Oxford graduate, but has never really lived up to his educational background. Is he jealous of me? Yes, of course. Indeed, I've been receiving messages that the most dangerous people are the cleverest, which explains so much about the current situation of the world. In my first episode, I spoke about a card reading in Bali, in which I was told not to trust someone, and in each episode a new candidate appeared. But maybe I now truly know who's behind it all. The ending of my business and effectively my career, whilst predictable, came after I'd already sunk into despair, alcohol, and a sense of despair. I believed that Indonesia was a new chance for me, which it was, but little did I realise that it was unwittingly bringing me from the UK, whilst he had secured himself a role with one of my suppliers. But maybe the biggest clue was that I met him via my friend Jeff. You may recall Jeff died on the very day I found that Branwell had been admitted into a mental institution. Now, Jeff was an alcoholic, a lost soul and susceptible. But someone this person was also jealous of, not least as Jeff was very handsome, and this person, being homosexual, lusted over Jeff. On reflection, that bad attack we had at the Hotel Egret was in fact after I'd spent some time with him in his apartment, waiting for Branwell's mother to bring him back to Manchester. And now there are two feelings that I've carried with me for some time, and these are the distrust of psychology and the magic of Aleister Crowley. Well, this person was a psychologist. Whilst openly he was Wicca, I find it highly likely he practices Crowley magic. I emphasise Crowley rather than the Golden Dawn, who, whilst I'm amused by, I've never felt those powerful feelings I do against Crowley. Of course, this may be mere conjecture, but I do feel like the final piece of the puzzle has been released. Having already dealt with so many problems, I cannot say I'm particularly concerned about these revelations, nor indeed seek any form of revenge. Now I find my light, and I know how to use it, and frankly, that's all that matters. Dark though these thoughts are, I've already accepted their outcome, and need to simply continue on my path. Indeed, this really does feel like the rebirth for me that I have been anticipating. But maybe the greatest impact on me of this new knowledge is that I should no longer fear Indonesia. It's true that some people have been using black magic against us. Certainly many are jealous, and we were poisoned. But it may also have been influenced by this magic and acted in ways that they could not fully comprehend. Certainly I have long felt that our neighbours in Jakarta were more fearful of our black magic than their own. In addition, a good many people have tried to help us. Not least, I need to reconsider that all of the Dukans and Ustads who did what they were able to. Indeed, many suggested that the origin of the magic was not from Java nor Indonesia, with many confused that it was Chinese, but then I'm often mistaken for Chinese in Indonesia. In particular, there was the first Ustad in Banten, who insisted that the problems were not from Indonesia and implied that they were coming from the UK. Over my 4 previous books, I've explained how I pondered the darkness of the Indonesian character and slowly realised that Indonesia had simply allowed me to understand the darkness in the world. Indonesians, including Parkano, always say to me when I complain about their country that there are good and bad in every country. I've always dismissed this by pointing out the objective measures by which I have condemned Indonesia. Well, I now realise how right they are. My experience in Indonesia has allowed me to really understand the darkness in the world, and fighting this darkness is my true mission. Not for retribution. Indeed, karma will take care of this. No, I must really use my light. This includes helping my brother and Branwell as much as I can. Neither are perfect, but they desire my love, as they are simply caught up in forces they don't fully comprehend. It also explains my mother hanging on to life until she sees me happy. Indeed, this now explains my dead father's comments that they were simply playing roles, as were our Jakarta neighbours, friends and the Dukan brother-in-law. My metaphor of people as avatars was not so far from the truth, as they are simply bound up in forces and karma they don't really understand and maybe even aware of. Another way you could see this is people who do not have the free will, that I still believe us all to have. And this is the reason why man does not have the right to judge, only Allah. It also shows me that Parkano is right in sending black magic, as the most important act shaping the world, and indeed, yes, the Messianics are partially correct in warning against all magic, because it is indeed evil, and I now understand the meaning of evil. So now really is the time to cut myself off from my country of birth and to embrace Indonesia, including Jakarta, and put my trust back in these welcoming people. But yes, often weak and controlled by stronger overseas powers. Yes, evil, but I need to show compassion and love. Even if I'm correct, this informer employee is caught up in a view of the world in which he sees abuse of power as somehow natural and normal. He's an intelligent person who stumbled upon his magical powers and, lacking a religious conviction, followed them. He followed a philosophy of Anton Wey, another person I have been deeply distrustful of, and until now could not understand why. Whatever the truth, he's his own person, and it's not for me to judge, nor even hold a grudge. For whatever evil I feel is my own internal evil, and all I can do is to remove my own evil, not focus on others. Those of you followed each of my episodes will be asking if any of this is true. Well, you may have guessed everything is true and everything is also untrue. Even when I was foretelling the future, it became real, as though my writings were themselves magic. Well, now it's time to end all this and to walk into my light, for nothing matters anymore. So what was really an inner sanctum of Solomon's temple? It was me as a young child, categorising my toy soldiers by size and colour. I hugged myself as a child and told myself not to be afraid. My categorising was all I could do when I found myself all alone and frightened. My father on his bacon slicer in the grocery store, and my mother in a hairdresser's salon doing perms and blue rinses. Indeed, I have a memory, maybe false, of crying out for my parents. But no one was there, so I panicked, much like we all do at times in our dreams when we cannot scream, sometimes called sleep paralysis. My toy soldiers were substitutes for the protection of my parents, and these little toys took on the powers of statues of Hindu deities. I've no idea why these toy soldiers were so important to me, but they encouraged a behaviour within in which has defined my life. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. So, dear reader, this really is the end. I realise that you'll have worked things out long before me and be shouting at my stupidity, for which I must apologise. All the twists and turns have been very real, along with my slowness in coming to terms with the universe. Thank you for your patience. There will be more drama in my life as I learn to use the light, but this particular darkness has come to the end. And with it has ended my past and its influence on my future. For I no longer have history, only light. And that is more than any of us could ask for. Well, that concludes this chapter from my fourth book, The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. And it's actually the final in this series of books. I'm not saying I won't write another book, but I feel this series is now complete. I really hoped you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to add a new chapter every week to this book. So if you want to hear about it, subscribe and hit the bell. Now, I'm not doing particularly well with these eBay, YouTube algorithms. So if you could hit the like button and make some comments, I think it helps me. I hate to ask you for this. I hate it when I hear people coming out with this sort of statement. But the truth is that this has been like a full-time job for the last 4 years of my life. And I'm still a long way off from receiving any money whatsoever for it. So I really do need to, I suppose, beg you. Subscribe, like, make comments. And thank you very much. Thanks.